And you asked about, what is the cost of not doing this? And it's huge. I mean, the cost of not doing it is basically just not being able to participate in your sport is the tip of the iceberg. When we think about relative energy deficiency in sport or REDs and having low energy availability, which will happen if you consistently do not fuel enough. If you are consistently in a low energy availability state, there is not one system in your body that will not be touched by this.
If someone's thinking about their training for 2025
Yep.
and one of the levers they haven't played with is on the run fueling,
Mhm.
how do you begin?
So number one always is, what are you currently doing? What is your baseline? So I'm never ever, and this goes for anything we're working on, I always want to see where are we at now? Because I'm not going to have you go from like 0 to 100, because we have, what I always tell people is we have our ideals, right? Like whether they're, science backed guidelines that we're looking at, or hey, this would be a great meal for you, or whatever it is. Maybe we're working on increasing carb intake, et cetera. But I mean, you're never going to get there, and not in a way that feels good to you and your body, if we don't kind of get there incrementally. So I'm a big fan of baby steps. And this is all going back to like, hey, how can we be less outcome driven and more process oriented? And we're really focusing on, hey, okay, let's look at that process of getting you to where you need to go. And let's make that sustainable. Because if you, again, like just make this huge leap, like maybe your gut isn't appropriately trained and you're gonna feel like garbage, or if you try to like add a ton of carbs and your body's not used to it, or a ton of fiber, whatever we're working on, your body's probably gonna feel horrible, and then you're just not gonna stick with it. So I always love to see, like, maybe we're working on, okay, this is the breakfast you're currently doing. Okay, so this is what you enjoy. This is great, but here's how we can make it better. Or, okay, this is what you're currently doing during a workout, during a long run. Okay, well, number one, do you want to try new products? Are you happy with what you're doing? How is that feeling in your body? And then we kind of go from there. So it's really assessing where you're at, also figuring out what your goals are, any kind of other relevant history, and where you want to go and what you like. And a lot of the times, I mean, the beauty about sports nutrition these days, at least, is there are a bajillion options. Like every time I meet with a client, I hear about other products that I've never heard of before. And there's just so much out there. And that can be really, really overwhelming. And there certainly are products that are terrible that I steer people away from. But there are a lot of amazing products out there. And the nice thing about that is that there's something for absolutely everybody. I think a long time ago, I mean, I was just talking with someone on my own podcast about this, how they were kind of steering away from a lot of sports nutrition because they had a bad experience with goo and just kind of felt like goo was all of the things. And it's like, no, there are like tons of gels that are different. There's tons of drinks that are different. Just experiment and figure out what works for you. And I have no attachment to any brand. My only job is to make sure that what you're using is helping you reach your goals. It's keeping you healthy and safe. It's allowing you to do the sport that you love for as long as possible and as well as you possibly can. And I'm just kind of being like, here's what's available. Here's the library of things. Choose, So I just present the menu of options and then help my clients kind of get there.
What's really cool is that a lot of the sports nutrition brands are doing the same thing. I know I've had a
Yeah.
lot of conversations with Scratch, and they've had dietitians whose their only job in relation to customers is to speak with customers about how to get more sports nutrition that works for them. And it
Hmm.
can be Scratch, it can be bonk breakers, it can be precision, it can be goo, it can be carbs, like whatever it is, like they just want people to fuel. And ultimately, like the goal of a sports nutrition brand is to sell product, but they also want people to do it properly and in a way that's not going to make their stomach turn. So one of
Hmm.
the pushbacks that I get around higher carb or appropriate fueling even is that it's expensive. Can you talk about I guess the cost of not doing it versus the cost of doing it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is, obviously depending on what sport you're in, like obviously if you're more on the trails and ultra and all that stuff, like we are working in some real foods potentially versus just sports nutrition. But yeah, it definitely gets expensive. Some people will make their own stuff, and there are definitely recipes for that, whether it's making your own sports drink or making your own gels or chews or bars or whatever
Or
you're
go to a
doing.
gas station and buy stuff there. Like
That
I
too. Yes.
the benefit of trail running is that you're likely not at as high of an intensity as if you're, threshold or marathon effort or half marathon effort, and you can tolerate a bit more unless you're David Roche and running, 6-minute pace up Hope Pass. But
Yeah.
even he is doing high carb fueling and has that dialed in at the 100-mile intensity. But like I was looking at Skittles and it's like 30 grams of carbs a serving. It's just like gummies.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
like gummy worms. Any of
Skittles,
these things
Sour
work.
Patch Kids. You can do like fruit snacks, applesauce pouches. There are all kinds of things you can do. And what I always tell people, and this is something to generally keep in mind, is that there's no uniform, like if you have a gel or chew or drink, it'll have this in it. Like there's such a massive variation in how many carbs, how many calories, how many, electrolytes, like whatever is in these products, you always have to look. You can never assume something's going to be there. So like just being aware of nutrition labels. And of course, sadly, as we know that recently we couldn't rely on nutrition labels with Spring Energy, which is gladly in the rearview mirror. But for the most part, I'd say, we can trust most labels, or hopefully we can, but just kind of making sure you're keeping an eye on those things. And you asked about, what is the cost of not doing this? And it's huge. It's huge. I mean, the cost of not doing it is basically just not being able to participate in your sport is the tip of the iceberg, right? Like that's just one of the things. When we think about relative energy deficiency in sport or REDs and having low energy availability, which will happen if you, consistently do not fuel enough. And that's both during workouts, runs, whatever, and surrounding in the everyday, et cetera. If you're consistently in a low energy availability state, there is not one system in your body that will not be touched by this. Mental health, cardiovascular health, your immune system, musculoskeletal health. I mean, pretty much everything ultimately gets touched by this. And the cost is huge. The cost is absolutely huge. So that's obviously such a complicated, very in-depth discussion, but it's a huge risk. It's a huge risk. And I think people don't really realize it until they're really suffering the consequences. And unfortunately, there are still a lot of people who think that, lighter is faster. We now know, backed by research, that fueled is faster. And yeah, so it's definitely, there's a huge, huge health, both physical and mental health cost to not fueling adequately.
Totally. And not to be too commercial, but one more product that could potentially help if cost is an issue. Have you seen Carbs Fuel, the gel?
I've heard of it and I have not tried it yet, but I really want to. Someone told me it was kind of minty tasting. It sounded interesting.
Yeah. So I met with their founder and he was like, it's unflavored, but it it has a flavor. And he's like, people peg it as all sorts of different, I thought it was like kind of peachy and people describe it as all sorts of things. But anyway, it's $2 a serving for 50 grams of carbs compared to most gels that are $3 or $4 a serving for 20 or 30 grams of carbs. And so you can get it on, again, Fuel Goods, use code FTLR10 and it's $1.80 for 50 grams of carbs. You can't really get better than that unless you're shopping in the bulk section at your local supermarket and getting gummy bears, which is a really efficient way to do it as well. But
works.
You can't use code FTLR at your local Safeway.
Yeah, exactly. Safeway is great, by the way. I love, if you guys are into savings, I literally will go to, because I shop at Costco and Trader Joe's and whatever. I literally just pull up my app and be like, what's on sale right now? And I'll just shop the things that are on sale. And they constantly have discounts on things. I'm like, this is great. So don't be afraid to shop the coupons, especially now with that food pricing is crazy.
Shop the coupons. Okay, so you're also a podcaster. Where did that come from? Why did you start your podcast and what is your podcast all about?
Yeah, so I started the Eat for Endurance podcast back in 2019. I was super duper pregnant with my first daughter. And why did I start it? I was out on a run. Of course, that's when all the good ideas happen, right? Out on a run on the East River in New York. And because, we lived there again for about 10 years after moving back from London. And I was just thinking, well, first of all, as a virtual solopreneur or solo practitioner, it gets super lonely. And back then I was still kind of freelancing in an office, but, I was working from home and this was even pre-pandemic, but particularly now, it gets very lonely just doing my own thing. And this was such an opportunity to talk to people. But the real impetus for starting the show was I was thinking, I want to do a big project. I enjoy writing, but not enough to write a book or do something like that. But I really love to talk. And I really love to talk with people and meet people. And I want to hear about athletes' stories, but from kind of a nutrition perspective. So I came up with this kind of idea of getting to know various athletes, whether they're, recreational or elite, and hearing about their athletic and whatever stories they want to share, but from the nutrition perspective. So starting with, their earliest memories of food and going to the point of, the present, and just kind of like you and in your show, like just kind of seeing where it leads us, right? So whether it's through like big races they had or really big achievements, or a lot of times it kind of navigates through really tough relationships with food and body, where that came from, how they recovered from it, if it's still ongoing, and really just showing that and demonstrating there's no one size fits all when it comes to nutrition, that whether you're an elite athlete or recreational athlete, I mean, people fuel, quote unquote, successfully, however you want to define that. People fuel in a way that feels good to them in so many different ways. And really what I was trying to combat was this very dogmatic approach to nutrition that we see all the time, where this is the only way to eat and this is the right way and you must follow this diet and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, like, yes, we have general principles that we see in the research, and we know that certain things are good for you, but like, there's no one right path. And I tell this to my clients all the time. There's no one right way to do this. We can get to the same place a million different ways. It's just going to look different, right? So that was kind of the impetus for it. And then I originally didn't plan to interview other dietitians, but again, things got really lonely in my little world in the pandemic. And I was thinking to myself, especially after moving to California, it's like, I want to meet more colleagues and just learn from them and share stories and, whatever. And so I started interviewing other sports dietitians, and it's just been the best way to get to know. I've made some great friends and connections, and it's been really awesome. And so that's been really fun as well. So yeah, it's been a little over 5 years now, my little show that has a niche group that listen, I suppose. And yeah.